Okay, let's loop through all the films. We know that the films are going to be an array, so we can loop through those. And how do we loop through those in React? Well, React uses a different way of looping. So you're probably familiar with a for loop or for each loop at this point. And I want to get rid of that as well, because we want every li to be in every film. But we're going to be using a new way. Instead of using a for loop or for each loop, we're going to be using map. So we open up our logic here, and we say this.state.films.map, and this is a function, and this is going to take a film, so it's going to loop through every item, and we're going to call it film. And we could return li with the film in there. Let's go ahead and see what this does. Let's create a new one in here. And look at that. That's working for us. Now that's really, really cool, but what if we wanted to throw this into a new component? We could do that very, very easily. And so what I'm going to do here is, because there's a lot of code, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here. And we're going to get rid of this. And we're simply going to call this movies. And up here, in our render function, above our return statement, because nothing below a return statement is ever executed, needs to be above our return statement, we can say const movies is equal to this.state.films.map. And what can we map in here? First of all, we can map the film name itself, or the film URL. So let's call this URL. And we can also give it an index. We're going to need this in just a second, and I'll show you why. And then, instead of saying like li something rather, which that didn't do what I wanted it to do, instead of saying li something rather, like that, and writing JSX in here, or HTML rather, we could write JSX. So we could return film item row, which does not exist yet, but we could make it exist. And this is giving me funny syntax highlighting because I was missing that arrow in there. So now we have this new component. We haven't created this component yet. We need to go and create this component. Now this is going to be a rather simple component. So let's go ahead and say class film item row extends react.component render, and we return, let's return multiple lines. We use opening and closing parentheses. We're going to return an li every single time. There's going to be a link that goes somewhere. We don't know what that is yet. And there's going to be some text. And in just a second, we're going to pass in some properties so that we can dynamically put some data inside of our film item row. So let's go down and find our film item row. And all this is going to do is throw every movie into a const called movies, which we can then put inside of here. Let's go ahead and try this out. And did we get an error? The href attribute requires a valid value. Oh, okay. That was my mistake. Valid value. So let's just say go nowhere.html. There we go. No more complaints. Okay, let's refresh. And you can see in here, it says some text. And that URL, if you look at the bottom left, says go nowhere. Now, what's interesting about this is if I make this console just a bit smaller here, we can read this error. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. If you ever see this, what you need to do is pass in a prop. And what we do here, because every component in React needs to be, for more or less, it needs to be unique. And so we pass in a key to make it unique. And we're going to pass in that I. Let's go ahead and save that. Refresh. We don't get that error anymore. Now let's go ahead and replace this text with the URL and that URL with the URL. So we're going to pass in another prop in here called URL is equal to URL. And that's just coming from here. So what this is doing essentially is it's looping through all of our films. For every film, it's going to map that URL and then the index in this basically a for loop. For every film, it's going to then return a new component that has a unique key in there. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, etc., with a URL prop as well. Now, what's nice about that is we don't have to write multiple components. We can simply put the prop in here. We can say this .props.url. And I'm getting that from, I'm getting that from, where am I? Let's close some of this up. I'm getting that URL from here. So that's a prop. So this .props.url does not belong in parentheses because that is a string. We want this to execute some actual logic behind the scenes. And let's put that same one in here. This .props.url. Save. Our compiler said there were no problems. We're going to refresh our page. I like to refresh. You usually don't have to refresh unless you see an error and it doesn't automatically update for you. I like to refresh just as an old habit. And check this out. It says swappy.dev API films 4, API films 5, API films 6. Let's go ahead and click this link. API films 6. That matches up here, so that's a proper looking link. It is Revenge of the Sith. Episode ID is 3. And it has all these characters in here, all these planets, all these starships, all these vehicles, all these species. Has all sorts of stuff in there. So that is working for us. Essentially, what we did was, we took a longer way of doing this. This is a very, very simple component. So we probably didn't need to put this into a component. But we did. We put it into a new component that renders an LI for every single movie that a character is in. Then we said, pass that URL in as a prop. And as a prop looks like this. We pass that URL in. So for every film, we called it URL. We could just as easily call this film, and this is going to work the exact same way. This is not going to give us any errors. If there's 4 movies, there's 4 movies. It's going to store it in a constant variable called movies. And then we access movies down here. Now, I want you to give this a shot. Go the hard way. Don't do the easy way that I showed you in like the first minute or 90 seconds or so. Try this the hard way, because this is what React is like in production. As a professional developer, you're going to see components split out into tiny, tiny components like this, or larger components that use lots of other components. So you need to be really familiar with how to use a component. Last but not least, every item in a list, where are you, needs a key. And that key, I just said this key is going to be I. So if this is the first iteration, I is going to be 0. Second iteration, 1. Third iteration is going to be the number 2. And that's just going to say that every one of these is going to have a different key value. And that just makes it unique so that React is nice and happy with that, and so that it knows how to handle that component down the road instead of saying every component is the exact same. Go ahead, try that out. If you get stuck, leave your question down below, or feel free to ask your question in the Facebook group Learning to Code. When you're done that, head on over to the next lesson, and I'm going to give you a project.